Hey guys, welcome into the shop. Today we're going to pick up where we left off on part one, and we're going to take a look at this pen that we made for this inlay, and we're going to look at grain continuity and a little bit deeper dive into why it's important. So you can see here when I was speaking to the cutting of the grain on straight edge pieces, where it doesn't make that much of a difference. But when you start to put a gap in, you can see that no matter what you do, these pieces don't quite line up. Now, because you're bridging that gap with something colorful or bright like this, again, it doesn't make a drastic difference. But if you line this piece up here, now that grain looks nice and neat. When you spin it to this other side, look at how far that is off. So when you're cutting in these inlays, you always want to keep that in mind because you're trying to keep the beauty of the natural grain flowing and then making it look as if it grows through the center of your rings. So that's always the goal. I just think that makes a prettier looking piece. So today we are going to take this piece and do a double inlay into it. And then we'll see how that looks in relation to the same grain orientation. What we're not going to do is opposite sides. And the reason for that is because if you do that, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get a simple X. So what we're going to do is we're going to do adjacent sides so that we can see what happens when the rings are closer together. And then what we'll do is we'll use the pen clip to either go down the short side or the long side, because what happens, you're going to have like a little cut here, and then this piece is going to be super thin. The other thing I'm trying to do with that is to show you guys that there are pitfalls to this process and precautions you have to take. So let's get to the saw, let's get cutting, and we're going to forego all the extra stuff in this video. So you'll see me here, you'll see me at the saw time-lapsed, and then at the end when we go to turn this down, you'll see me at the lathe. With that one done, we can now get some 5-minute epoxy set up. We'll get this glued up, and then we can move on to the second cut. All right, so with the first one in, we are now going to rotate and run it again. So you'll see here, this was the bottom, and we ran it through to 45 degrees. So we got that cut. Now we're going to rotate it down one time and do the same cut again, and this time it'll form the X right here. Let's get over to the table saw. All right, now you'll notice that I have these marked, side one, side two. It seems like a silly thing, but I've actually come in and cut these before and rotated too many times and messed up the pattern I was looking for. So I find it easier just to throw a little number, set a double marks, just so I know where my first side is, where my second side's going to be, keep my cuts even. Again, just a standard practice thing that helps me keep things organized. So now we can start to see why leaving some meat is important. If we draw a line straight across where this inlay is, this first inlay is, we're right at the top of the cut on the next inlay. Same thing at the bottom. So now what this means is when this piece goes in and gets glued up, the top and the bottom of these rings are going to be even with each other when they get cut. Now, before I put this on the lathe, this is one of the pitfalls I wanted to point out. When you come around, you'll notice that we just have this little bitty spot here that grips. So if you kind of draw an imaginary line right down the center, you'll see that this piece has no meat on the back side of the part. So when you're going to put your tube in, this is only going to be glued to the tube, to the two parts of your inlet. Now, the reason that's significant is because these parts will pop out on you. So what I like to do is, at least when I'm boring out the tube, I will use some masking tape and I will wrap around just to give a little rigidity to the exterior structure, so that if I'm not running quite fast enough on the lathe, if my bit's a little bit dull, the heat won't cause the resin to separate and fly apart. Or if it does cause it to heat up a little bit and become weaker, the tape is there to kind of hold it in place so you can finish the cut. Then let it cool off before you glue. So now I'm going to get this cut up, bored out, and we'll take it to the lathe. Something else I like to do is, after I get my blanks cut, roll them to where they're book matched, and I will drill in from the same side. That way, if my drill bit goes off just a little bit when I'm cutting, at least the entry points in the center, where this is going to meet up in the middle of the pin, are relatively close. Again, just thinking about continuity of grain. All right, so here's a good example. If you look at the back side, see this one came out relatively close to the center. This one a little bit farther to the edge. But if we flip it back to the bookmark side, you'll see that the entry points are pretty even, which means that when this closes up towards the center of the pin, all that grain is going to be nice and lined up with each other. So let's get these tubes in and then we'll get it turned. All right, changed my carbides today, so these should cut better, but keep an eye on this space right here. This is the spot that I told you will tend to blow out if it's going to. So we're going to take it slow. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Now, this is not someplace you want to race. You want to take your time until you just slowly get these, because this is that the back part of the blank where you left that little bit of meat. So you're just trying to work down past that ever so gently, because you don't want this piece popping out. All right, I'll take a minute or two to get these cleaned up, and I will see you back at the table. So let's talk about what worked, what didn't, and what we'll be doing moving forward. So briefly on grain orientation again, you can see that even with the gap in this one, because the grain was a little bit straighter, it matches up much better. Also, you don't have anything as drastic here, so you're not trying to these big bands. Nice and clean. If we look here at the inlay itself, we get more of a ribbon effect than we do if we had just done opposite sides and gotten the cross pattern, or the X pattern rather. So that ribbon is what will end up making the Celtic knot, because we'll have this low side over here filling in this gap, and then this high side here filling in this gap. So you'll have the 4 intertwined rings. Now, the more astute of you will have noticed that when I was at the table saw, I had one side lift up on me a little bit. And so if you look, you can see that this and this are just a little bit off of each other. Nothing drastic, but it is noticeable and it's there. And that's what happens when you either let the piece lift slightly as it's going through the saw, or if you end up with slide where you cut all the way through and then the pieces shift when you're trying to glue them back up. Now, luckily, these pieces stayed for me. We didn't have anything pop out. Those little eyes stayed in place. So all in all, I'm happy with this one. So in our next lesson, we will move on to the quad inlay for the seam ripper. And we will also talk about alternate materials instead of just using solid hardwood, other things that we can use to go from arguably very nice inlays to absolutely stellar inlays. So I will see you guys in the next lesson. See you then.